So we're in Book 2, Canto 3. This is a very interesting canto, the glory and the fall of life. At the beginning of the canto, Sri Aurobindo gives us an imaged description of the life that we know. Life as it is, full of doubt and confusion, this great variety of extremes and contradictions, and there seems to be something distorted and perverse about it. No? But at the end of the first section, he told us that this is not the true face of life. Pure and bright from the timeless was her birth. Her moods are faces of the infinite. Beauty and happiness are her native right, and endless bliss is her eternal home. That is the true origin of life. No? And in the second section, which begins on page 118, 𝒂𝒓𝒄𝒕 gets a glimpse of that kingdom of the griefless life. And we are going to read more about that. We ended last time with this wonderful vision of calm heavens, of imperishable light, illumined continents of violet peace, oceans and rivers of the mirth of God, and griefless countries under purple suns. So I'm going to start reading from there. This vision of griefless countries, this once a star of bright, remote idea, or imagination's comet trail of dream, took now a close shape of reality. The gulf between dream truth, earth fact, was crossed. The wonder worlds of life were dreams no more. His vision made all they unveiled its own. Their scenes, their happenings, met his eyes and heart and smote them with pure loveliness and bliss. A breathless summit region drew his gaze, whose boundaries jutted into a sky of self and dipped towards a strange, ethereal base. The quintessence glowed of life's supreme delight. On a spiritual and mysterious peak, only a miracle's high, transfiguring line divided life from the formless infinite and sheltered time against eternity. Out of that formless stuff, time mints his shapes. The eternal's quiet holds the cosmic act. The protean images of the world force have drawn the strength to be, the will to last, from a deep ocean of dynamic peace. inverting the spirit's apex towards life, she spends the plastic liberties of the one to cast in acts the dreams of her caprice. His wisdom's call steadies her careless feet. He props her dance upon a rigid base. His timeless, still immutability must standardize her creation's miracle. Out of the void's unseeing energies, inventing the scene of a concrete universe. By his thought, she has fixed its paces. In its blind acts, she sees by flashes of his all-knowing light. At her will, the inscrutable supermind leans down to guide her force that feels but cannot know. Its breath of power controls her restless seas, and life obeys the governing idea. At her will, led by a luminous immanence, the hazardous experimenting mind pushes its way through obscure possibles mid chance formations of an unknowing world. Our human ignorance moves towards the truth that nescience may become omniscient. Transmuted instincts shape to divine thoughts. Thoughts house infallible, immortal sight, and nature climb towards God's identity.
This.
We go back, yes. One sentence.
This was a stark and bright remote idea of imagination's comet trail of dream, took now a close shape of reality. Gulf between dream truth, earth fact was crossed. Among the worlds of life were dreams no more. His vision may only unveil its own. Their scenes, their happenings met his eyes and heart, and smote them with pure loveliness and bliss.
Thank you. So this, what was described in the previous section, this glimpse that he has of the kingdoms of a griefless life. Once that vision was like a star, something very bright and remote, a star of bright, remote idea, something hardly realizable, or imagination's comet trail of dream. The comet has a bright head, and then this trailing luminosity, a trail of dreams. But now for 𝒂𝒓𝒄𝒕, it takes on a close shape of reality. It's close to him, it's real. the gulf, the huge gap that is normally there between dream truth and earth fact. That gulf, that huge emptiness was crossed. Those wonder worlds of life were dreams no more for 𝒂𝒓𝒂𝒂𝒂. His vision is able to make all that they unveil to him, to possess it, to take it all into himself. So the scenes and happenings of those wonder worlds of life met his eyes and heart, and it's a powerful, like a powerful blow of pure loveliness and bliss. We dream of these things, but rarely experience them. Alice, you read?
A breathless summit region drew his gaze, whose boundaries jutted into a sky of self and dipped towards a strange ethereal base. The quintessence glowed of life's supreme delight.
Thank you. So his eyes are drawn upwards to this summit region, as if looking up to the tops of high mountains. And Sri Aurobindo says breathless means it's if you go up to the top of Everest, it's difficult to breathe. No, the atmosphere is very rarefied. No? And the boundaries of that summit region jut up there, sticking up into a sky of self. This is a sky of consciousness, of experience. That's the tops, and down they dip down on their bottoms towards a strange ethereal base. It's not a base of matter. It is something extremely subtle and fine. And he sees this glow, the quintessence, the fifth essence, the distilled essence of life's supreme delight. Praveen.
On a spiritual and mysterious peak, on your miracles high transfiguring mind, divided life from the formless infinite, and sheltered time against eternity.
So there's one particular peak of those high levels, no? And there it's only just a line, some miraculous line, which divides life from the formless infinite. We should remember this, that the very highest levels of life are close to the transcendent. The very borderline between manifestation and transcendence, eternity and infinity. He sees that very, very highest line which divides life from the transcendent state, from the formless infinite, and shelters, protects time from the formlessness and endlessness of eternity. So that's the transitional line where things get created. Amrita.
Out of the formless stuff meets his shapes. The eternal scribe holds the cosmic act. The protein images of the world force have drawn the strange to be, the will to last, from a deep ocean of dynamic peace.
Yes. So that formless stuff which is there on that borderline, time uses that to mint his shapes. Minting, it's a word that we use for making coins. Nowadays, of course, we don't have many coins, we have paper money, but it used to be the idea of some kind of a machine which would stamp on metal, make a coin that would have some value, as if all time's shapes are made out of that formless stuff which comes from eternity and infinity. He's speaking about the relationship between this manifestation and the world beyond. The manifestation couldn't exist unless it were supported by the transcendent. So the quiet, the silence of the eternal is holding all the action of the universe. And the world force, that life force, who makes all these many, many appearances, these changing shapes and lives, have drawn the strength to be and the will to last from a deep ocean of dynamic peace. We think of peace as being at rest, but this is dynamic peace, and that's giving rise to all these forms and happenings and events and beings. Protean, this is a word from Greek mythology. Proteus is I think he's a sea god who can never be seized hold of because he's constantly changing shape. So Protean, it means something that forever shape changing, constantly changing form. Life is like that, no? It enlivens one form and then it leaves that form and moves into another. The forms of life are always changing.
In the evolution also, the first formed thing, the protozoa is single cell, it go on changing its forms.
Ganga Lakshmi.
Inverting the spirit's apex towards life, she spans the plastic liberties of the one, to cast in act the dream of her caprice. His wisdom's call studies her careless feet. He props her dance upon her rigid days. His timeless still immutability must standardize her creation's miracle.
Yes. So this is the relationship between, we can say, Purusha and Prakriti, or the Lord and his force. No? She, the world force, she uses the freedoms that he provides her, the plastic liberties of the one. It has nothing to do with this plastic. It means, the word plastic means some substance which can be shaped and molded. So what she does is to take the spirit's apex, its very highest point, and point it downward, like a downward pointing triangle towards life. And using that point there, she spends all the liberties, the freedom, the untrammeled freedom of the one to create things here, to cast in acts the dreams of her caprice. Here in South India, we have master craftsmen who cast metal in bronze into wonderful forms. No? So in a similar way, she's taking that free-flowing liberty of the one and casting it into molds, into actions, according to her caprice, her fancy. But that fancy of hers is steadied, it's kept somehow steady and firm because of his wisdom. He's giving some command which steadies her careless feet. She's just dancing around without caring how and where, no? But he's providing a rigid base, an unmoving base for her dance. His timeless, still, unmoving immutability, the fact that he, the Lord, doesn't change at all, that gives some firmness, and that standardizes her creation's miracle, all the miraculousness, so that there is a certain recognizable repetition of shapes and forms and movements and events. That's the sign of his wisdom's call.
What denotes the spirit? Spirit invoking the spirit's apex.
So an apex is the highest point of a triangle. So she's taking that highest point of the spirit and pointing it downwards.
I'm asking what is here is mentioned as spirit, the one?
Yes,
Spirit,
this is the one. Yes.
The spirit means it gives a lot of meanings. Spirit also self.
Yeah, it's one of the, we could say, the levels of being. So the highest level is spirit. And the highest level of the highest level, that's what she points down towards this cosmos of time and space and form, of individual forms. He here authorizes her to do all that work of creation. And she makes full use of all the possibilities, even the highest and freest possibilities that he offers her. And he offers her this firm base. There's the, in Indian iconography, there's this image of Lord Shiva lying and Kali dancing on his breast. No? So he's giving her this support so that she can do all this movement, this dance in time. Slava?
Out of the void, unseen energies, invented the scheme of a complete universe. By his thought, he has its grace in his blind acts. He sees by flashes of his all-knowing light.
Let's pause here. So this is about the action of the world force. She takes hold of all these unseeing, unconscious energies of the void, of space, of emptiness. She uses them to invent this scene of a concrete universe, a material universe. And she uses the thought of the One to fix the measures of that universe. And then she sees what happens. What do those energies do, those universal energies? They are unconscious, their actions are blind. But she, the world force, she gets, nevertheless, in that blindness, in that unconsciousness, there are flashes of His all-knowing light, like lightning flashes. She sees something, partially, for a moment. Joel.
At her will, the inscrutable supermind leans down to guide her force that feels but cannot know. In its breath of power, controls her restless seas, and life obeys the governing ideal.
At her will, this mysterious, inscrutable supermind, she compels it to lean down, to guide the unconscious force. If we take a microscope and look into the structure of rocks or crystals or metals, we see amazing beauty and order. And Sri Aurobindo says that's the involved supermind. It's the supermind leaning down to work in apparently unconscious matter to bring that order. So her force, the world force, doesn't have a power of knowledge, but it has a power of feeling. And she takes guidance from this supermind. And its breath of power controls and organizes and orders her restless seas, these oceans of unlimited force. So life obeys the governing idea, the great creative idea which is there in the supermind that's organizing everything and keeping it in its place. Johannes, yes?
At her will, led by luminous immanence, the hazardous experimenting mind pushes its way through obscure possibilities, mid-chance formations of an unknown world.
So, this attempts of our mind to make order and to find knowledge, it's because of her will. She said to the mind power, come. This luminous immanence, this is of course the presence of the Lord. So the experimenting mind which tries things out by trial and error, hazardously, it pushes its way through all these different obscure possibles amid these chance formations of an unknowing world, a world that seems to be made without consciousness. But it's because she's asked for it that it happens. She, the world force. Kamala.
Human ignorance moves towards the truth, that nescience may become omniscient, transmute God's house, infallible, immortal Son. Natural climb towards God's identity.
Yes, it's like a description of the whole creative process, no? The world force. She's calling on the Supreme, using his powers and possibilities, and she calls on these different powers, supermind, mind. And as a result, here we are, and our human ignorance is moving, even despite us, whether we know it or not, it's moving towards the truth, so that what is nescient in the universe, what has no knowledge, no consciousness, may become omniscient. Instinct is one great power of life, but he says the transmuted instincts, the instincts have to be transmuted and they'll get shaped into divine thoughts. At one level of evolution, instinct is the way that the supermind acts, no? But it can become more conscious. So in this way, nature climbs towards God's identity, back to this oneness which we have seen in Book 1, Canto 4, no? Where he and she are one. No? So Mother has made this picture of the figure 8. So the two, he and she together, nature plunging down into the darkness and making her way up again, back to the oneness. And he is helping her in this work, Martin.
The master of the world, self-made her slave, is the executor of her fantasies. She has canalized the seas of omnipotence. She has limited by her laws the illimitable.
Continue.
The immortal bound himself to do her work. He labors at the tasks her ignorance sets, hidden in the cave of our mortality.
Yes. The master of the worlds, self-made her slave. He's accepted to become the slave of nature and to carry out all her fantasies. So she has canalized, she's built channels for the seas of his omnipotence. And she's limited by her laws of material nature. She has limited the illimitable, the immortal being has made himself her slave, bound himself to do her works. So he labors at the tasks that her ignorance sets. He labors here, hidden in the cape, the cloak. He covers himself up in this cloak of our mortality, our physical nature, which is subject to death. It's this great mystery that it's the Lord who's doing all this. He's become all of us, and he's doing all this at her bidding.
But the same knowledge was given to 𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒕 in Canto.
Yes.
He's repeating.
Now Sri Aurobindo is repeating, and he goes on repeating again and again, helping us to understand these things. Yeah.
Cape means cloak.
Yes, it's a cloak with a hood. Mm. You can read, Bhuvana.
The words, the forms that goddess fancy made have lost their origin on unseen heights. Even severed, straying from their timeless soul, even deformed, obscure, accursed and fallen, since even form has its perverted joy, and nothing she brings out that serves delight. These two can to the peaks revert or hear, cut out the sentence of the spirit's fall, recover their forfeited divinity.
Yes. All these worlds and forms that have been made by the world force according to her fancy. Now in the material universe, they've lost touch with their origin on those unseen heights. But, he says, even severed, even cut off from their origins, straying from their source, their timeless source, their source beyond time, even deformed, obscure, even apparently accursed. Later on we are going to have to read about some of these accursed worlds, the worlds of falsehood and evil, accursed and fallen. And then he explains why they exist, since even fall has its perverted joy, and nothing she leaves out that serves delight. It's a kind of delight. Even these, deformed, accursed and fallen, these too can revert, they can return to the peaks, to the higher levels of consciousness. Or even here in this world, they can cut out the sentence, the consequences of the spirit's fall into matter, and they can recover that divinity which they have forfeited, which they have given up when they came into the material world. Such an amazing thing he's telling us. You may be accursed and fallen, but you're not accursed and fallen forever. It's possible to return to the heights. I'll just read the next bit. At once caught in an eternal vision sweep, he saw her pride and splendor of high-born zones, and her regions crouching in the nether deeps. Above was a monarchy of unfallen self. Beneath was the gloomy trance of the abyss, an opposite pole or dim antipodes. There were vasts of the glory of life's absolutes, all laughed in a safe immortality and an eternal childhood of the soul before darkness came and pain and grief were born, where all could dare to be themselves and one, and wisdom played in sinless innocence with naked freedom in truth's happy sun. So 𝒔𝒂𝒂𝒕 can see all these different levels at once. In that eternal vision sweep, he can see it. It's not that he sees first one and another, he can see the whole range from the highest levels to the nether deeps. And he's going to explain them to us level by level, some of these kingdoms of the griefless life. But for today, we'll stop here. This, once a star of bright remote idea, or imagination's comet trail of dream, took now a close shape of reality. The gulf between dream truth, earth fact, was crossed. The wonder worlds of life were dreams no more. His vision made all they unveiled its own. Their scenes, their happenings met his eyes and heart and smote them with pure loveliness and bliss. A breathless summit region drew his gaze, whose boundaries jutted into a sky of self and dipped towards a strange ethereal base. The quintessence glowed of life's supreme delight. On a spiritual and mysterious peak, only a miracle's high transfiguring line divided life from the formless infinite and sheltered time against eternity. Out of that formless stuff, time mints his shapes. The eternal's quiet holds the cosmic act. The protean images of the world force have drawn the strength to be, the will to last, from a deep ocean of dynamic peace. Inverting the spirit's apex towards life, she spends the plastic liberties of the one to cast in acts the dreams of her caprice. His wisdom's call steadies her careless feet. He props her dance upon a rigid base. His timeless, still immutability must standardize her creation's miracle. Out of the void's unseeing energies, inventing the scene of a concrete universe, by his thought she has fixed its paces. In its blind acts she sees by flashes of his all-knowing light. At her will, the inscrutable supermind leans down to guide her force that feels but cannot know. Its breath of power controls her restless seas, and life obeys the governing idea. At her will, led by a luminous immanence, the hazardous experimenting mind pushes its way through obscure possibles, mid-chance formations of an unknowing world. Our human ignorance moves towards the truth, that nescience may become omniscient, transmuted instincts shape to divine thoughts. Thoughts house infallible, immortal sight, and nature climb towards God's identity. The master of the worlds, self-made her slave, is the executor of her fantasies. She has canalized the seas of omnipotence. She has limited by her laws the illimitable. The immortal bound himself to do her works. He labors at the tasks her ignorance sets, hidden in the cape of our mortality. The worlds, the forms her goddess fancy makes, have lost their origin on unseen heights. Even severed, straying from their timeless source, even deformed, obscure, accursed and fallen, since even fall has its perverted joy, and nothing she leaves out that serves delight. These too can to the peaks revert, or here cut out the sentence of the spirit's fall, recover their forfeited divinity.